Welcome, and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. On the program today, we're going to be approaching mental health from a particular way that probably isn't what people usually follow. Typically, when we feel depression, we might go and see a clinician and sit down and talk about our troubles and find out if there's a way that we can explore an alternative to feeling better. And if that doesn't work, then most of the time we're prescribed medication. As a matter of fact, that seems to be one of those growing things that have been happening over the years where a lot of psychotherapists tend to prescribe medications. It seems to be the go-to for all of these different conditions. Joining us here today on the Beyond 50 radio program today is a licensed metaphysician and psychotherapist, and she is creating an emerging trend where she brings more of a holistic approach and alternative healing by bridging spiritual and metaphysical principles with mental health. Her book is Sacretherapy, and we're going to go from psychotherapy to sacretherapy by finding a more holistic approach to this. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program our guest, Amelia Kemp. Amelia, how are you doing today?
I'm very well, Daniel. How are you?
Doing well. You know, you take a look at this book and you realize that in here there's 170 mental and emotional diagnoses worldwide that you're approaching here and how you can approach this with 8 steps to well-being. And I think to myself, you have really jumped into the deep end of the pool with something like this, haven't you?
That's one way of putting it for sure. It's definitely a pioneering effort, yes, to bring holism to the topic of mental health, yes.
Mm-hmm. Now, you actually started as a psychotherapist, and what I really enjoyed was the interpretation or the definition of what psychology actually is. And I thought, you know, that definition is pretty unique considering how most of us think of psychology today.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's why I went back to the early pioneers, because when we break up the word psychology to be psyche and logos, meaning the study of the soul or mind, universal mind, it really meant to study the soul. And so we really have strayed from its original holy intent. And so my goal was to resume that meaning for those looking for holistic and alternative solutions outside of the mainstream way of treating these diagnoses.
Mm-hmm. Well, we also find ourselves too emerging. It's funny that we call it alternative health when it was actually an approach that's been used thousands of years ago, you know, and all of a sudden, you know, because somebody maybe came along and invented penicillin, for instance, all of a sudden this was the panacea for everything, that our health care became very regimented and boxed in, and you can see that it just doesn't work all that well.
I love what you're saying, because truly what we're calling New Age or holistic and alternative is really traditional, because it's still used in most of the world's populations. And so actually the medical model is really the alternative approach. And so what I'm trying to do is be a bridge between that, because there are some people on both sides of the discussion that believe that only holism or only the medical model should be used. And what I'm trying to say is that people have a right to a choice, and that this earlier way of treating actually had validity and is very impactful, especially when we talk about even herbal remedies that's not even discussed in mental health, but they do have validity. And I've seen how because it honors that reverence of the body temple, that it has also brought people back into alignment with who they are. And so you underline a beautiful point that I'm trying to make, which is that holism and the old way of doing things should not have been thrown out with the bathwater, that all of it still has validity and is quite powerful.
Mm-hmm. Now, I know that you actually have a radio show. Is that true?
Yes,
okay.
Yes.
And that's the Sacretherapy. We want to use that word right, because I think people might think sacrotherapy, and that's a whole different thing altogether.
Right, like the word sacred without the D.
Right,
so
exactly.
It's the same name of the book. The book is called From Psychotherapy to Sacretherapy, and the show is called the From Psychotherapy to Sacretherapy radio show on Blog Talk Radio, and it's just being syndicated in October to 35 other stations, so it's going to have a much larger audience as well, so that more people can hear about this holistic approach.
Well, and I'm believing, too, and why I wanted to raise that for our listeners out there is the fact that if it's becoming syndicated, that must mean that there are a lot of people that were in situations that seem relatively hopeless following what are supposedly traditional. See, there's the other word. The other stuff is alternative, and it's the new age stuff, But no, the other stuff that we're doing that hasn't really been as effective is called traditional. Okay, well, maybe it's time to break traditions, but the point being is that you must have a growing audience that are saying, what she's talking about here not only is making a lot of sense, but it's really beginning to work and transform lives.
It really is. I mean, the testimonies and the letters that we get, it's just been so touching because so many people have said if they heard about this other way of viewing their symptoms 20, 30, 40 years ago, that their whole lives would have been different because the stigma and taboo with the traditional medical model has left so many people from the moment they were diagnosed just feeling so sick and defective, which is why I say in my book, you're not sick, you're sacred. And so bringing that sacred whole feeling to let them know that there hasn't been a disconnect, that they may just be out of alignment with one area, mind, body, or spirit, but everything out of alignment can come back into alignment, has been such a powerful message. It's just amazing to me. I mean, literally people are crying when they leave messages on my voicemail at my office, and so it has hit a nerve, and so I'm just honored that I was offered to be on this syndication, and so I'm really, really excited about how many more people will be able to transform their lives and have the life that they were meant to live versus feeling that something went wrong or that they did something wrong. So it's a beautiful process, and it's fairly simple in the sense that most people are admitting, since the book just came out in January, that we just went through the 8 steps over the last 8 months on the radio show because I wanted to do the auditory part with the book. And they realized, wow, in these 7-8 months, their lives changed versus some of them telling me they've been in therapy 7-8 years. And here in 7-8 months of going through these steps, they feel just a new lease on life, that their symptoms have really subsided or changed, or the meaning they've attached to them have changed, which is what propelled their ability to feel this self-empowerment now. And so it's just wonderful what's happening.
Now, do you feel a sense of resistance from the medical community, specifically, that you are a licensed psychotherapist, so you're actually part of that community?
Right.
That you have presented this out there where there's a sense of a threat where you're kind of shaking foundations enough to where people of alleged credibility are trying to say, okay, not that spiritual voodoo nonsense that you tend to hear out there. And to give you a good example, okay, there's a fascinating movie out there now, and this has been a debate that's been going on for quite many years, and that is about Shakespeare, okay? And the movie is called Anonymous, which really creates this. It's just a great movie in general.
I saw it. I loved it.
So you know what I'm talking about. And the fact is that they're trying to say that Shakespeare really was not the guy that wrote these plays. And then, of course, in the after scenes and so forth, where you look at all the extras, they say, this is who the person would have had to have been to be able to write these plays. And Shakespeare was pretty much none of these people, okay? But the fact is we were talking with a friend of ours that actually has been in college and loves Shakespeare, and he says, the real problem with that is there have been people that have built entire careers out of Shakespeare, and for people to start coming in and saying, well, maybe Shakespeare really didn't do this, you're going to be causing a lot of earthquakes out there.
Exactly. Fortunately, I sent it out for peer review to both sides of the camp, to my metaphysical colleagues as well as my traditional psychotherapists. And that particular group who did the peer review for me were very supportive. But as far as a larger impact with the AMA or the APA, the American Medical Association or American Psychological Association. I haven't gotten any feedback yet because I think, and even my colleagues who got the peer review, they didn't want me to list their names in my acknowledgement section. So people were a little nervous, like, well, let's see if they stone you before we go on record.
Right.
So I'm like the sacrificial lamb here. But I was okay with that. But I am honoring the traditional path in the sense that I am a psychotherapist, and that path has helped some people. Mm-hmm. But what I noticed is that it wasn't enough for me, and it wasn't enough for many of my other clients who did need to embrace the spiritual aspects of their being in the treatment plan. And so I'm honoring both. I'm not saying that there's no validity to it. Of course there is, but I'm saying that for those who embrace this holistic part, they did seem to heal faster. They do seem to get back to where they wanted to be. My book sort of gives them back to themselves. And so from that standpoint, there's certainly traditional psychotherapists who think this is a bunch of foolishness, though. Like, I can't believe that you reinterpreted all these diagnoses in this simplistic way. They felt that I was taking the disorder out of it, and I said, that is what I'm doing. I don't like the word disorder. It's not consistent with the laws of creation. I do feel that it's a reaction or divine intention in the first place, and so they were correct to extract that from the book because I think it helps people to feel more whole. And so when somebody feels disordered and broken, that does not bring them back into alignment because they vibrate at a place of brokenness. But if they feel like, okay, I'm just misaligned over here a little bit, or this was my divine intention in the first place, and come back into alignment with that fullness of who they are, I have seen it work. For instance, for confidentiality, let's just call her Pam. Pamela was a professional from New York, but she suffered with anxiety and was going along just to get along, but she was scared to death underneath, and she picked up a copy of my book and finally found something that she said described what was happening to her in a way that really reduced her fear of panic attacks, and that once she understood her symptoms from this place of symbolic meaning and got to what I call the energy basis of the matter, she started going and doing the aligning processes and the other steps in the book, and her panic attack stopped. And she had been in therapy, she said, for 9 years trying to overcome this. And so she just couldn't believe. In fact, she said that she laughed when she read my introduction because she's like, yeah, okay, one more thing. But she really even went into it not expecting it to work. And so for her to have been so surprised and felt the need to write me and tell me the impact this book had on her, it really validated what I'm saying here. And so it's stories like that.
Well, I think the clarity, too, that our listeners should come to understand about what you have presented here in Sacretherapy is this, that you are opening windows and doors to possibilities where there might have not been the existence of those before, maybe a single door, maybe a couple of doors. Now, we'll go ahead and we'll talk about a couple of these that you feature here in the book, ones that I have become very familiar with. But first of all, you know, it's the idea that you put something out there that opens to a possibility. Now, as I suggest to all of our listeners, as we've covered things like this on our program over the last 10 years, you know, go out there and do your homework and ask questions. And if you're not satisfied with the answers, find out what are those answers and how do you get answers to those. You know, go on your own journey. And when you take a look at what has been written here, what you've put together, you have culminated a lot of information in this book, you know, together, so this was no easy task.
Yes, it took me 3 years to write the book, absolutely, yes.
3 years, I would have imagined it was more than that.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, it was based on my 19 years of being a therapist, but the 3 years of actually putting it together. Well, actually, you know, you're right, though, because it was 3 years before I started writing. When I started writing it, it was my husband who innocently said to me one day, how many of these diagnoses have you reframed? Because I started reframing them because Louise Hay's book, who deals with physical diagnosis and symbolic meaning, didn't cover the mental part of it. She had about 14 of the 170, and so I had to start creating them. And I said, I don't know. So I went through charts and realized I had already done about 90. And I said, he says, well, how many is it? And I said, I don't know. So I went through the DSM and the ICD, the international classification, and counted them and realized, well, it's 170. I might as well do all of them. So that's how that actually came about, and that's the part that took the 3 years to do the rest of them. So you're right, it was more than 3 years if I count the years that I had innocently just started doing those and offering them to clients. And they're the ones who encourage me, because my clients would say, yeah, this feels right. This resonates more with my spirit. And then I saw them actually overcome it. And I was like, wow, this is really powerful. And it was powerful for me, too, because I used to faint and everything all the time with my anxiety and went to neurologists, doctors everywhere, and nobody could get me to stop fainting until I read Louise Hay's book, You Can Heal Your Body. And she just had affirmations for fainting, and I started doing those, and I stopped fainting, and I couldn't believe it. And I was like, wait a minute, how are these words stopping this? And so that's when I started doing research on metaphysics and realized, oh, it's not the words, it's the thoughts. Words are just an extension of thought. And so I changed my thoughts about my symptomology, and everything begins with a thought, and that's what my brain chemistry back into alignment. I stopped secreting cortisol and started secreting serotonin, and that's what helped bring it back just with my thoughts. And so that got me interested, and from there the rest was history. I just started reading everything I could on alternative healing, holistic healing, metaphysics, and all of that, and it was a life-altering thing for me, and it's been life-altering for many of my clients who choose the holistic path. So that's how this party got started.
Yeah, and that's how it really should be, is the holistic approach to taking a look at a challenge. And the fact that you actually have reframed things in such a way to where a person takes a look and realizes, you know, I've been stamped with this as if I am broken. And the real sin, if you want to call it that, which is simply missing the mark, is that we ever believed for a moment that we became imperfect, because why would a perfect creator, if you will, create an imperfection?
Exactly.
You know? And that we've actually come to that point in our lives. But you're seeing such a huge awakening of people that are saying, you know, this old dogma and way that we've been doing things hasn't gotten us any further along in our evolution in centuries. And they're saying, you know, but all of a sudden you're seeing more spontaneity and more awakening to this. And I think that why, in some ways, like, you know, one of the things we'll touch on here in a minute would be that of autism or the Asperger's syndrome, is the fact that these are particular souls, if people want to believe in a reincarnated spirit, which, you know, that's a possibility, that they're coming to show us, you know, the way you've been doing it, you've been missing the mark. So we're going to go ahead and figure this out on our own, but more on that in a minute. But the fact that we get labeled that, so then what do we do to conform, and really, who has made those rules in the first place?
Exactly.
So.
That's my point exactly. And it's literally for each country, less than 1,000 clinicians that ultimately chime in on that, and then a smaller body of committees that decide this is normal and this is abnormal, because based on the medical model, we have what we call a normative curve. And so anything that they've decided is too little is on one side, and anything they feel is too much is on the other side, and those things get called disorders. And my offering in my book is, well, wait a minute, if this is life that's being lived beyond these borders, who are we to decide where to draw the line? This is everybody's included. So how dare us say that you're disordered because we prefer you hang in this normative core. We like people right here in the middle, and so, but it's not your choice. If they came forth as a spirit into the physical like the rest of us, come on now, let everyone feel good about who they are and just say, wow, that's a way of being. And when you raise that question about Asperger's, that's what I'm actually saying with, and to drive my point home, Asperger's got thrown out of the DSM this year.
Right.
And so that's how subjective this is. And so I kept it in my book because I wanted to honor those who've been labeled with that. But just the fact that we can say, okay, well, this is no longer a disorder because more people are doing it, and this is now one because we just found out some people are doing it. I just wanted people to understand that this is subjective, and so we have to start honoring our own internal guidance about this, that we all come forth with certain ways with our own individual fingerprints on things, and that should be honored. And so with Asperger's specifically, with the medical model, seeing it mainly as a limited social interaction, and they call it a disorder. And so, but I say that in a society where many people dislike being alone or even enjoy their own company, that most people are eager to socialize and share likenesses. And therefore, to them, it seems strange to observe others who actually like themselves and prefer their own company and find contentment in exclusive activities. And so that's what they're calling social impairment. From the Sacretherapy model, I view it as emotional self-sufficiency. And so I believe that there's an inherent understanding that one is an individualized expression of spirit, and as such, those who are born with that particular reaction, not disorder, I'm purposely using the word reaction, are just not conformists. And therefore, they choose not to adapt to social cues or norms and may be attracted to restrictive or what we call unorthodox stimuli. And so these souls, as far as I'm concerned, may come forth to just relish in having manifested their spirit into physical matter and are simply satisfied with the idea of being temporarily human. And therefore, their intention to remain emotionally self-sufficient helps them to not be preoccupied with other people's opinions of them coming outside of that their preferred norm to do other things until we dishonor them by saying that your behavior is maladaptive. Come over here with us. You shouldn't want to do this this isolated activity. What's wrong with you? And that's just crazy to me. To me, they're demonstrating for us that, you know, that we have everything we need within us and that we know other souls are co-creating out here with us, but it's okay. It's going to be all right. And so that's the approach I take on it, because I believe that if it's happening, it must be happening for a reason. So I see it as a divine intention, not as a misaligned thought or a disorder at all.
And taking a look at that, now I don't know how true this is, but wasn't it Albert Einstein that had the Asperger's syndrome?
Albert Einstein?
Yes.
Oh, I can't qualify that. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't know, but I thought I'd throw that out there because I have heard, and it's been mentioned that was a possibility, because here was a guy that spent a lot of time in isolation going over his theorems and so forth and proving some of the greatest quantifiable theories known to mankind, you know, and he didn't care too much how his hair looked, and the guy was a handsome man in the early years, but after a while he just let it go. None of that was important anymore. You know?
Exactly. And if that's the case, that validates the point I'm making here, that we all have our own fingerprint on it, and he did a wonderful service to the world. And so that's an example of exactly what we're talking about here, that this is about difference versus judging people and labeling them and stigmatizing them and making them feel bad for it. And then the parents, when they have a soul that comes forth through them that has a diagnosis that has stigma, then it affects them as well, and it affects their interaction with their children that come forth this way. And so they're busy trying to get their child to be, quote-unquote, normal, or they're thinking something wrong, versus when they come to me and I offer them a place of acceptance and understanding that this soul came forth to demonstrate that it's okay, they relax immediately. They stop trying to they don't get as frustrated with their child anymore. They realize, so you're saying that, you know, my child's not sick? And I'm like, no, but your child is sacred, and your child came forth with their own divine intentions, and accept that and appreciate that and learn how to communicate with them based on a wider view versus this limited view that we have, or these shoulds that we put every human being through, that everybody's different. And so it just makes the world of difference. When I was speaking in Raleigh, a lady brought her adult daughter who had Asperger's to meet me because she said when she took the book home that night, her daughter just cried in reading that because, her daughter came and said to me, all my life in school and everything like that, people always made me feel like I was a freak or something was wrong. And to read your words, her daughter was 28. She says that, just reading that, now the rest of my life I can feel okay about me. And she just gave me a hug, which they claim that some people with Asperger's would never do. But this lady, she felt it. It was a visceral feeling within her that she knew that, and she believed me that she was okay. And so her and her mother I just can't tell you the appreciation they had for that. So it's that kind of impact that the book is having on those who find out about it, because they get to, at least like you said, I love your words, it demonstrates possibilities. Mm-hmm. And it gets them to thinking, well, I always thought that maybe I was okay, but everybody's telling me I'm not okay. It's just interesting. It's very interesting.
Well, it's not only interesting, but you consider how, for instance, our educational system has been set up here in America that, there are these general hoops that we're all supposed to jump through to be able to achieve the level of being able to graduate, and not everybody is successful. In fact, the rate now, I believe, is 1 in 2 children will actually drop out of school by the time they reach high school. And so that means that either A, there's something wrong with these kids, 1 out of 2, that's a lot of people right there, or there's probably something about our educational system that needs to be radically changed. Now, another particular one that you address in here is one that I have personal experience with, and that's of ADD, ADHD. And so, here is a boy that's pretty much unsettled, picking up on all these things going on in the room, and before you know it, is being sent off to the principal's office because I'm disrupting the class, usually getting, negative teacher reviews about how I'm all this intelligent, I'm not working up to my potential, constantly disruptive. If he would just settle down, he'd be a great student. And on, and it was even to a point that even in the 3rd and 4th grade, I was only allowed to attend school for half a day. And even uglier still, there was a time when I was in the 4th grade, and I've shared this, and that is that I simply showed up to class, and I was there, and we were probably 10 minutes into the class, and the teacher said, could you please go to the office, and I thought I was being sent there for an errand. I get there, and the principal says, go ahead and go in and see the nurse. And so I go in to see the nurse, and the nurse says, why don't you go ahead and lay down on that bed right there? And that's where I spent the rest of my day until 3:30.
Wow.
And this didn't happen once, but it actually happened several times to the point I just didn't want to go to school anymore. Mm-hmm. And it was all because the teacher just didn't feel she could handle me. Mm-hmm. And my mother couldn't figure that one out. And so anyway, going down the road, those kinds of things actually happen, and to a lot of people, and I don't find myself unique in that, but I kept wondering over the years, what was really wrong with me? Now, what was fascinating was I came across a book by Tom Hartman, I believe it was, and it was titled ADD, A New Approach. And what he was talking about there is that people who have or could be labeled ADD, consider these people to be hunters. These are people that go out into the woods and are hyper aware of their whole surrounding. Mm-hmm. And then there's farmers. These are the people that go about the mundane, regular, everyday, focused tasks of doing what farmers do. And I looked at that and I couldn't believe how liberated I thought, because what he was describing in there so described how I was. I could go into groups and pinpoint things, and just like it was almost like life slowed down in front of me, like it can't be this easy. And the fact that he was laying it out that way, and this was back in 1992 or 93 when I picked up this book. And here all this time I kept thinking, and trying so hard to change myself to fit in, and realizing, wait a minute, who you are is a leader. This is, where followers follow, and it really changed the whole thing. And I think to myself, if so many people had that same opportunity to have, as I said earlier, a window opened or a door opened to a possibility, and you see this beginning to happen again, and broadcasting this show for more than a decade, I see more and more of it happening now, we're breaking down old structures and old limitations to possibilities, which is where we should be.
Well, you said that very elegantly, and your experience, I used to be the director of mental health for the school board, and so I naturally went in and saw many, many kids who were diagnosed with ADD or ADHD, and that's where I really gained my broader perspective on what was happening, and I really see it as just divine objective to not take anything in one's environment for granted, and that people come through with this are just scoping the matter out, or at least noticing that it's there as a part of the landscape of life. And so when it comes to hyperactivity, if it's added, I call it energy, that it's just the added impulse to go beyond noticing and experiencing it to the moments it's sensed and honoring its divine presence and everything. And so what I would say to the teachers who were frustrated with students who were doing that, I said, well, really they're teaching us. I said, because you're teaching a class where the other students are doing their work, and a bird did just go by the window, and you're telling them to pretend they didn't see it, or many are so entranced into trying to sit straight and do what y'all are asking outside of the norm, and the person that you're labeling with ADD or ADHD notices it. Mm-hmm. And they're noticing everything. They understand its divine presence. They acknowledge it. And I said, so actually, maybe we're the ones that should be labeled because we're not in tune with our sensory perception. I said, they're utilizing it all. And I said, so we need to honor that instead of trying to subdue it or medicate it and all of that type of stuff. We need to honor what purpose does it serve. And so I'm so glad you had an experience with that other book you ran into, and how it opened that window or door that you're talking about, because that's what I'm praying my book will continue to do for people, too, to let them know it's so many ways to interpret this, that it's not one way, and most of the ways that the medical model keeps interpreting things as negative ways, where it makes people feel that something's wrong with them. And so it's nothing wrong. I can't tell you how many parents would bring their kids to me, and if the child is just moving their feet or shaking their leg, they're hitting the child and saying, stop, listen to her. And I'm like, he can hear me? Why are you just because they're shaking their feet or moving their leg doesn't mean they don't hear me. But this undivided, sit-still military stance that we want children to have is crazy. And so I honor so much that you got a broader view of it, and that it freed you. And I'm hoping that my book will do the same.
And certainly that's what our radio show was all about as well, is to present these opportunities for people to realize there is a lot more to explore out there if you're just willing to open your mind, your heart, and your spirit to realize, this is available to you. And in the end, it's all about results. Don't you want the results of a freer life to be authentically who you are? And I remember some time ago I was reading, I believe it was a book by Alan Watts, and he was writing, there was several essays that he wrote in there, philosopher Alan Watts, and he came across or was expressing the idea of mental health and mental illness. And he says, here we turn this over to people who are doctors who study mental health from more of the aspect of, brain dysfunction and physiology. And he says what he believed would be a better approach was to bring in an anthropologist. And I thought, because as he presented that, I thought, that makes sense. Think about it, that your functioning may not fit with a particular society, but maybe with this group over here, perhaps in the Amazon basin, for instance. And I thought, what a genius way to look at it, an anthropologist, the study of human behavior. What are your thoughts on something like that?
Well, I was smiling because anthropology is what I wished I had gone into once I really got down the road into this, because what we're talking about is beliefs, and beliefs determine the quality of a person's life, because everyone's life experience is being based on their beliefs. So what a person believes about themselves and the things that are happening in our individual experiences determines that quality of life. So if they believe that they're sick and defective in a culture that promotes that, then they're going to think thoughts that trigger brain chemistry to make them feel badly. But if they believe that they're not sick and they're sacred in a culture that honors that, like the Amazon, and then they're going to think thoughts that's going to trigger serotonin and release natural healing endorphins in the brain. And so looking at these cultural milieus all around the world where beliefs are accepted, just like in certain parts when I went to Africa, there are certain parts that understand that if a person transitions, that they may see their loved ones, and it won't be labeled as schizophrenia or a major bereavement crisis. It's normalized there. And so everybody's like, oh, okay, so Aunt so-and-so visited. How's she doing? She made it. Okay. But over here it's like, you saw what? And the DSM, we'll allow you to do that for about 6 months. After that, it's going to be a disorder, so hurry up and work it out, because we feel that it's just a part of bereavement in this culture. So just in different cultures from an anthropology paradigm, definitely where you live matters in terms of the acceptance of your beliefs. And so the whole meaning process of it is so crucial, which is why I say it's not the bad things that happen, like the abuses and all of the other things that I talk about in the book that get people into a place of depression, or that it's the focusing of thought on it and the meaning that they attach to it. So that's why symbolic meaning from Carl Jung back with the archetypes and all of the ancients that understood the symbolism, which is what philosophy really is, it really opens that window and door that you're talking about to possibility. So I love that that author pointed that out early on.
Now let's take a look at something that's really prevalent here, and that is depression. It seems to me, if you're watching television, especially during prime time, that it's almost in a 2-hour span, you're going to be guaranteed to see at least 3 commercials about a pharmaceutical medication out there that's going to help you alleviate depression. And I think to myself, well, if there wasn't so much advertising in our culture, we probably wouldn't be as depressed as we are. I don't know. What are your thoughts on something like that?
No, I agree with you. I agree that the more we focus on dis-ease, as metaphysicians, we hyphenate the word disease and we call it dis-ease, that the more that we create it. And so absolutely, wherever, as from an energy paradigm, energy flows where attention goes. So if we are really giving our attention to this subject, more people are thinking, yeah, well, I did have that and I did have that. But if we were focusing more on well-being, then I'm sure that we would have more of an incidence of that. But with the pharmaceutical companies and things like that, which is why I think it's less validity, at least in America, with herbal remedies, that they sort of have that lobbied in and clicked in, but show programs like yours are helping us to change that paradigm where the herbal remedies can be taken more seriously and maybe even tested, because herbal remedies right now are basically looked at as a vitamin, so the dosage has to be subdued. But I would love to see the research if they increased the dosage of some of these and then did a comparative analysis. But in the meantime, pharmaceutical companies, run that portion, and so depression is being advertised a great deal, because if you advertise it more doctors will offer the medication and more people will utilize it. And so there is some politics to it, absolutely, and that's why I say in my book that I want people to start honoring their own internal guidance systems. If something doesn't resonate with you, that doctor does not know more about you than you, that we all come forth with the same God source, the same intelligence, the same universal mind that you can tap into. And we're here to help each other, but we need to use research, pharmaceutical companies, medications, psychotropics, and all of that just to its logical conclusions. What really works for your body temple, because as many of the cocktails as they tried on me back when I was depressed in my 20s, none of that worked in the sense that I got sick or had side effects or I felt less than who I was. And no one really gave me a chance to really work it out just through understanding the power of my thought. That was not the focus of the attention was not so much the well-being. The attention was really on the symptoms. And I understand it because we're trained to do that as clinicians. But I'm so glad that I went seeking it on my own for these alternative ways to deal with depression, because depression and anxiety was my thing. Mm-hmm. And so much so that I was really, really scared, and understand that when you're going through it, you are in this really, really bad place. But I didn't realize that it was my thoughts and focusing on all the bad things that happened in my life that was keeping me there. But I was told that it was because they happened, that's why I was feeling this way. But that's not why I was feeling this way. Not because they happened, because bad things happen in life, but because I was focusing constantly on the fact that they had happened, resenting that they had happened, and crying about something that happened 10 years ago still, and not realizing that I could shift my attention to better feeling thoughts that would shift my brain chemistry and help me release natural healing endorphins that would give me that sense of well-being that I came forth to live. And so that's how many of the people I treat with depression, I tell them keep taking their medications and things like that. We want to do the balance. But as they do the Sacretherapy process, so many of my clients have been able to reduce their medication or get off of it completely, because now they've practiced this new way of thinking about what's going on with them, especially even with what happened with Robin Williams and Simone Battle, these two popular figures in society with suicide these last few weeks, brought a big surge of attention to when life's not feeling the way we want, or something happens that makes us feel upset, that it can get that bad. But I'm wanting to, and I did a plea on my radio show, and for 1 week I gave the book away to anyone who was feeling suicidal, because I wanted them to use that section in my book specifically on suicidal ideation to let them know that they can have the life they wanted to live if they're willing to do the thought work that requires. And this one lady literally said she had a gun in her hand. Wow. And remembered that she bought my book at one of my lectures this year. I've been doing a 10-city tour, and she decided to go read it. And she read that chapter called Ending the Matter, and she said it saved her life. And that just made me cry, her cry, when she called to tell me that. And, I mean, this is a stranger to me. Mm-hmm. But for somebody to tell me that, that was probably the most profound thing that happened this year, because I was like, this lady had a gun in her hand. And so I'm just saying that, but just, and I emphasized to her on the phone, I said, now see, you didn't increase your meds. You didn't do anything different. All you did was change your thinking. That's all that chapter did, is it helped you change the meaning you attach to things. Mm-hmm. And that brought you a sense of well-being in that moment. And she says, God, you're right. Nothing changed. My circumstances didn't change. I still owed everybody. I still this, that, and the other. But what you said in the book was said in a way that I could receive it and realize that is what I was reaching for. The ascension back to the source of my being is what I wanted. I wanted to feel my well-being, and you said it in a way that I could hear it. And now I know I can do it. And she was still going to go for her help and do whatever she was doing with her personal therapist. But that's the kind of thing that we're talking about. And so, but a pharmaceutical or traditional approach would have Baker acted her. If she had told her therapist, I'm sitting here with a gun in my hand, nobody would have been dealing with the thoughts, because it would have been a crisis. She would have been Baker acted, given more medication to try to bring her back into alignment naturally, which is correct, but nobody would have thought that just some words that are explained in an alternative way could maybe also give her the ability to secrete the necessary amount of serotonin that she needed to make her feel better in that moment. And so that's the point I'm trying to make, that our thoughts are so much more powerful than we ever thought, and we're not taught that. And so didn't mean to go on a tangent about depression, but that's a big issue for me, and so many naturally feeling that way, especially as we get close to the holidays, because that's the time from November to January that more suicides are committed every year. I mean, 800,000 people commit suicide every year, according to the World Health Organization. And so, and most of it's in that window. And so I really want anybody listening today to please, please. Unfortunately, I can't give the book away anymore because with Amazon and the other retailers that I have it with, they have to match the lowest price, and they made it clear to me that they can't match free. So I didn't know I wasn't supposed to do that, but they were very...
Well, you know, basically the price of your book kind of goes like this. You can pay the price and probably change your life, or most likely you will, or you can decide to go ahead and pay for your therapist's home in the Bahamas. It's up to you.
Well, that's an excellent way. You're right, because for a $20 book versus,
When's the last time your doctor actually wrote you a thank you card for his lifestyle? You know, there was one thing I kind of wanted to leave our listeners with, too, because it's so powerful about what you're saying about thoughts. And I remember if you go back to, like, okay, there's Napoleon Hill, everybody's familiar with his work. But the funny thing is his work came 20 to almost 30 years after the work that already existed from people who were known as maybe Christian Scientists or whatever the case is, that talked about the power of thought and how all sickness and disease can be healed when the thinking is healed.
That's right.
And they were talking about that long before The Secret and all these other people are jumping on and morphing and so forth. But here's one I really wanted to leave, and I thought this was really neat when I heard this, and it was a book on tape that I was listening to that had different people speaking, like Dr. Bernie Siegel, there was Marianne Williamson, and Deepak Chopra.
Favorites,
yeah, Deepak Chopra, all these guys. And there was one, and I can't remember who it was, but he said this, and I just remembered when I heard this how encouraging, especially from my experience, this was to hear, and that is this. He says, I want you just to think about this for a minute. In the billions and billions of years of evolution, okay, just think about that for a minute. Billions of years of it. Nobody can screw up quite like you can. Now, you think of the perfection in a statement like that. It took billions of years for us to get to where we are. That you're going to do it more unique than anybody else that exists. And that's pretty encouraging.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. You're absolutely right, and that's why in my acknowledgement section I honor all the early pioneers. And, you know, I called their name. I really felt they were with me as I was writing this because, like you said, like even William Atkinson in 1902, he was talking about the law of attraction way before The Secret, way before Abraham, way before all these people. And so you're absolutely right. This stuff goes back, and I would bet that it was being talked about even before he mentioned it, but he's the only record we have of it being mentioned in that context. But Aristotle, all of these, he's the first who used the term metaphysics, and then we go back to Imhotep in Egypt. You know, all of these things were happening then, but it was outside of that norm, so to speak, to talk about it. So a lot of this stuff stayed underground. And so, and even here we are in 2014, and people are saying, well, we're going to see what happens with you, Amelia, and see if they stone you. I mean, people are still worried about standing up for what they believe in, fearing of what other people think. And so I don't mind being the sacrificial lamb because I've lived it. I've healed myself. I've been healed for the better part of the last 2 decades, and I still use the tools if something yanks me out of alignment because they work. And so I so tell anyone, hey, the book's on paperback, it's on ebook. You can get it even less expensive for just $9.99, but it's tools in here that can help you. And I really hope you try it because it could change your life.
Well, a lot of great reading, a lot of eye-opening stuff in here. There's no doubt about that. It's certainly not something you read through, you know, that it's certainly, you know, you kind of look at to what appeals to you or what, you know, relates to you, and you take a look at that. And again, it's about opening doors and windows and anything else that you want to open up. So you can do your own exploration to find out who you genuinely really are in this world instead of trying to conform to ways that really aren't you. And, I mean, that's what can cause a lot of problems in the first place. And, Amelia, I do want to thank you for taking the time to join us here on the program today. It's been a real pleasure to have you.
You're welcome.
Being able to share this with the world and realize this, okay, that those who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who usually do. And it sounds to me like that's what you're doing. So those stones, let them become wet sponges.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you so much. I appreciate being here. It's been an honor. Thank you.
You bet. And give out a website if you have one for our listeners.
Yes, they can go to DrAmeliaKemp.com. That's DrAmeliaKemp.com.
Very good. Amelia, thank you so much for joining us here on the program today. What a pleasure.
Thank you.
You bet. You can find out more also. Visit us at Beyond50Radio.com. Again, open those doors and windows and find out that at your fingertips you've always had a world of possibilities. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for joining us. You've been listening to the Beyond 50 Radio program. And remember, live your day past halfway.